Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Uplifting Relationships podcast. I am your host, Dr. Cassandra Bolar, and I am just so thrilled that you are joining me for this episode. So, as promised, we are doing a follow-up to our forgiveness podcast, and this one is entitled, Will I Ever Trust Again? Oh yeah, so we're going to be talking all about, after you've decided to forgive, how do you move forward? How do you trust again? How do you rebuild? How do you restore family? So we're going to go ahead and dive all into that. We're going to talk about we're going to define what is trust essentially. And then we'll also talk about restoration. What does that mean? Because if trust has been broken, that means that there has been a breach. And you've probably heard that very popular saying where it says that trust, once broken, is a bucket. It's like you've thrown over the bucket and there's no longer any trust in that bucket. But to rebuild that bucket and trust, you have to do it one drop at a time. So that means that consistency is key. That means that really continuing on to do the work one drop at a time is really critical. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to do this thing one drop at a time and not giving up, because it will, take these little incremental steps to really rebuild trust in your relationship. So I don't know what it could have been. It could have been a major issue, or it could have been a small issue. Maybe you caught your spouse lying. I mean, that's a big thing, right? Or it could be something even as hard and as difficult as infidelity. There are different types of infidelity too, whether it's emotional, even if it's financial. Let's just say, your spouse made a big purchase and didn't talk to you about it, or something of that nature. It could be parenting related. I don't know what the specific breach is, but I'm hopeful and I'm prayerful that the information that will be shared in today's podcast will really help you to trust and move forward and build beyond this point. All right. So y'all ready? Okay, let's go ahead and dive right on in. So, like I said before, a breach has happened essentially. And so how do we restore? And what does that really mean? It means to bring back to a state of health, right? And whether that may be, and sometimes that state of health starts with you. And so sometimes it means restoring your sense of self, restoring yourself in the broken places and in the shattered places, because some things can literally shatter your very soul. That can happen in a marriage. But like I said before, it doesn't necessarily have to define the future of your marriage nor yourself. So how do we bring it back to this sense of soundness, this sense of vigor, this state of vigor? How do we renew? What does that look like? How do we actually renew and rebuild that trust? How do we essentially reconstruct? Because we dissected that. When I tell you, if you missed the first episode where we focused on forgiveness, we talked about defining it, practical steps, practical tips. We talked all about that. So if you missed it, I recommend that you go do a little search for the podcast episode that really focused on forgiveness part 1. Okay. So this is part 2. And the reality is that when you're reconstructing something, you have to see the value in it. And I don't know if you've ever had projects in your home when you're reconstructing, or let's just say you bought a brand new home, but it's new to you, but it's an older home, but you have a vision of how you want to reconstruct that thing. You saw the value in it as it was, but you wanted to take it to the next level. And I think that when there has been a breach, you have to see the value beyond what you can physically see right then. You have to see the value in your hope for the future, right? And painting a very clear picture of what you want to create. Because when you have that as a focus, it anchors you despite what you may see, right? And it's really, honestly, to rebuild, it is essentially a step and an act of faith, family. It takes faith to really rebuild and to see that value and to create their hope. And I always say, there's still value there. You just got to rebuild it. You just got to do the work, and just really kind of lift that up. And so in that resolve, so I also just kind of wanted to define what is trust essentially. So here's the thing. Trust is reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety of a person or thing, confidence. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with another flawed human being who could potentially let you down. So really, this trust factor is really your trust in God, right? Because when we're thinking about covenant, it is not just two people. It's really a third entity. And there's that entity, which is God, will never let you down. Right? And so he understands the power of the bond, and he has a strategy for reuniting you after the breach. And so really, I want you to put the weight of your confidence in him. A weight in the confidence of the hope that he has for your marriage and your relationship, so that whenever you're shaky, whenever you're emotional, you have that anchor, you have that trust, not just in your spouse, but you essentially have that trust in God, who is really the ultimate protector, the ultimate coverer of your marriage. All right. And so you can trust him that he can help create a strategy to rebuild the bond and to strengthen it if it feels like it has been disentangled, right? You can tighten that knot right back up. And this is the kicker with respect to what really resonates with me when it comes to trust and rebuilding and restoration. This is key. This is what I want you to really take to heart, is that trust is a confident expectation of something. It's hope. And as a therapist, that's one of our biggest jobs, is to help people have hope, to infuse them with that. A lot of times the people are coming, they don't have that hope. And so a big part of your job after you've decided to forgive is to really anchor your vision and your hope beyond what you see. I'm going to be talking about that a whole lot because it's just that important, family. So now that we talk about that, we talked a little bit about the definition of trust, and restoration. What are the keys? So there are 5 keys that I want to talk about when it comes to restoration. And then I'm going to specifically go into trust, right? Rebuilding trustworthiness. And with them, I think it's four things, and they all start with a T. So that'll kind of help you there. I probably should get this transcribed just in case you want to copy it, write it down for your notes, or just go back and listen to it over and over again. So really, how do we bridge the gap? Because really, when trust has been broken, it's like you're on one side of the mountain, your spouse or whomever is on the other side, and there's been a breach there. And trust is saying, I want to build a bridge now. I want to build a bridge so that I can get to you. I want to build a bridge now so that I can bond to you and be one. Because when there's been an infraction, naturally you protect yourself and you want to go to your place of safety. I know that on the ground I'm safe. But if I am, walking across a bridge, can I trust this bridge? I remember we were in the mountains one time. I'm not really afraid of heights. And do you know, I don't know if you remember Indiana Jones, but we were trying to go to a waterfall, right? And to get to the waterfall from one mountaintop to the other mountaintop, it was a bridge, but this was not a regular bridge. It was one of those air bridges where it's kind of shaky and it kind of moves, and it was wire, and you have to literally hold on. to cross the bridge, and you have to kind of like go a little bit slowly, one step at a time. And that's how it is when we rebuilding trust. It's kind of scary. It was amazing. I'm not afraid of heights. My husband is. Oh, don't tell him I told you. So, but anywho, but I was, we were going across this bridge, but it wasn't like it was like, it swayed. But I tell you, it was the most beautiful sight, because as you were crossing the bridge, you could actually see the waterfall. So it was scary, but there was an experience that we had by crossing the bridge that we wouldn't have been able to see up close. We wouldn't have been able to see or experience if we didn't cross that bridge. And that's what happens when we refuse to rebuild the bridge of getting back to one another in oneness. There's some beautiful sight. There's some beautiful experience that's on the other side of you getting through that breach, of that other side of you finding one another again, on the other side of you trusting one another again, of the other side of you loving and reaching out with one another again. There is something very beautiful for you to see and experience that you will not experience unless you rebuild the bridge. All right? There's something extremely beautiful with that, because we want to build the gap, bridge the gap, and we want to stop that breach, family. So these are the 5 keys with that restoration and rebuilding trust, like asking yourself if you can rebuild again. And before I go into this is a question that I get a lot. Some people are like, are we too far gone? Is this the worst case that you've ever seen? Is this a little too much for people to recover from? And I always say that really that decision is up to you. Sometimes people have stayed together for more, or sometimes people have not stayed together for less. But really, it is all about you and kind of what is your desire? Like, what is your goal? Okay. And so that is just something for you to think about and to consider. Like, really, the decision is in your hands. But that process is going to be scary. Crossing that bridge, it may be slow, it may be a little shaky, but there's some beauty on the other side. There's something beautiful for you to see. There's something beautiful for you to experience. And so the very first thing in rebuilding that trust, you have to come to a place of resolve. You have to come to the resolution that I am doing this thing regardless of how shaky it may be, regardless of how scary it may be. Because at the end of the day, there is no fear in love, because at the end of the day, your trust ultimately is in God. And he has proven himself to be absolutely trustworthy. So you have to come to a resolve, and a resolve is a firm decision, family, that you're going to work this thing out, that you're going to rebuild trust. And so resolve means to reach a firm decision, okay? And that firm decision in this case is that we're going to build that bridge, and we're going to cross it. We're going to reach each other again. And you must come to the resolve that you are going to move forward together, and that you're not doing it by yourself, but ultimately you're both trusting God in the process, and that he has some beauty for those ashes. All righty. All righty. So that's the very first key. The very first key, family, it is that resolve. Okay. And so since that is the resolve, now everything has to be filtered through that decision. And if it does not line up with your resolve, then you cannot walk that way. That's not building a brick. Okay. So everything has to be filtered through the following decision. Does this move my marriage or my relationship forward? Everything has to be filtered through that. Your thoughts have to be filtered through that, because your thoughts lead to feelings, which lead to actions. So your thoughts, your actions, your attitudes, your emotions, everything has to be filtered through. Is this helpful? Is this actually helping me build the bridge? Is this helping me rebuild the trust? And if it's not, You have to have a way to combat that thing. And willpower is not going to be powerful enough. You need to have some scriptures that you have written down that encourage your resolve, that build your faith, that help you to have a shield, because there will be thoughts that come, right? So literally thinking about the armor of God, like there will be thoughts that come that are contrary to your decision. And if you eat and mull over those things, then your resolve may also weaken. But we want to do things and we want to think and we want to behave in ways that are in alignment and actually strengthen our resolve. All right. And so with that being the case, you have to do things that are going to actually kind of gird that thing up. That's going to kind of strengthen that thing. Right? And so you may have to be mindful of the information that you're taking in. Does the information actually lower your resolve? Are you watching content that is actually going against your decision, that's not really in alignment, right, with what you say is your decision? And so here's the thing. If it doesn't move you forward, you have to resolve it. You have to find a positive solution. You have to counter that thing, whether it may be an attitude, whether it may be a suggestion from someone else. You have to have a way that is going to increase that resolve. Remember that firm decision, right? You remember how sometimes you've probably made decisions about things. Let's just say, take a diet. You made this decision. You got your food, you got your meal plan, and then somebody comes home with crumble cookie. That's our temptation here, right? We just got a brand new crumble cookie in the neighborhood. And man, that chocolate chip, that thing gets me sometimes, but kind of lowers my resolve when I'm around it. I have to sometimes I actually don't tell my husband, but I sometimes throw them cookies away. And I make sure to take them out of the box and actually really put them in the trash can. Don't just put them in the box and trash can, because that lowers my resolve. Anyway, side note. But the second piece, because when we're thinking about trust is really hope. And so we want to reaffirm that positive vision, because really, without, we perish without that vision, right? Without no vision, right? And that can definitely ground you. So really what you have to do is you have to really reaffirm your positive vision, because sometimes when an infraction has happened, what happens is, it gives you another vision. But that vision is not positive, right? That vision is not positive. So you want to clarify. You have to sometimes create and clarify a brand new vision for your relationship, right? And so you want to clarify that positive vision. And you want to come to the resolve that what happened doesn't have to determine what will happen. And what can determine what will happen will be your resolve, will be that positive vision. And when I tell you, I want you to write that thing out, detail, right? What does it feel like to be in your marriage now? What does it feel like to be in your relationship? What does it feel like when you see each other? What do you do when you leave one another? What are the new habits that you're going to put in place? I want you to have such clarity on that vision that you can't miss it. That when it comes to pass, you'll be able to recognize it for what it is. And not only recognize once you get there, but how will you also be able to maintain that thing? This is really important because your vision has a way of inspiring hope, right? When we're thinking about hope, what faith is, it's the evidence of things not seen, right? And so with that piece, is, in thinking about what we're hoping for, we want to have clarity on that. Even though we don't have substance of it yet, I got clarity on it in my heart and in my mind and in my vision. Okay. Now, another step to rebuild the bond, I've probably talked a little bit about this. It's this whole idea of friendimacy. Shasta Nelson, I cannot take credit for this, but she has a whole book on it if you really want to take a deeper dive into it. And it makes me think about the Lord where he says, with loving kindness have I drawn thee. And the reality is that that's like honey. Like that really draws you to someone. Kindness, positivity. It's an attractant. It attracts you to your spouse again. But here's the thing. When you're healing and you're in the forgiveness journey and in the forgiveness process, this is it's not as easy as it may sound, or it's not as easy as it may seem, family. And that's all right. But the reality is that you have a helper. You have a comforter. You have the Holy Spirit who can guide you and give you a strategy, remind you, bring all this stuff back to your remembrance, and even bring back to your remembrance your wife or your marriage or your relationship. So I want you to be encouraged in that. But in her whole idea of friendimacy, there's this whole idea that positivity, like we're drawn to people who we have these positive experiences with, right? It attracts us to the other person. And you mix that with vulnerability, right? Like, really sharing your emotions, that emotional intimacy, that emotional validation, positive emotions, maybe even sometimes not so positive emotions, but you're able to share that in a safe space. That's starting to rebuild the bond. And you do this thing over and over and over and over again. That consistency, what it is doing is that knot that seemed to have unraveled between you and your spouse. What that thing is consistently doing, little bit by little bit, is making the knot tighter, just a little bit by a little bit. It's creating one more slab for that bridge, even though it's shaky. It's actually creating another step for you to step out on, a little bit by little bit, and you see that, oh, I'm a little shaky. Can I be vulnerable with you? One step at a time, one step at a time. I see that I can. I'm making progress. I'm getting closer to you, and I'm building that oneness, family. That's what it does. It takes that time. So when you rebuild the bond, you can do that mentally, like sharing what's on your heart and your mind, like, your thoughts about important topics, that little mental stimulation. Emotionally, now that's so important, because that emotional intimacy, it makes you feel close to another person. And then spiritually, that is the key. Like praying together, like what is God sharing with you in your quiet time? Maybe even having quiet time together, reading together. And like, that is so beautiful, because we are more than just our emotions. We're more than just our bodies, but we are spirit as well. And when your spirit can connect to your spouse's spirit, there's a unique oneness there that God wants for us, right? And so having that intimacy is very important. And of course, physically, like I talk about this a lot, like, that's why sex, I think, is so powerful. And that's how covenants were made. It was through sex. And even on a biological level, when we engage in sex, what happens is oxytocin is released. And you know what oxytocin is all involved in. That is the bonding chemical, right? It's released when we nurse a baby, because that's bonding you to your sweet baby. I miss having little ones like that size. But anyway, so it bonds you then. It also is released in copious amounts during birth, because that's another important life experience that's going to bond you to your baby, right? It's important that you bond. And then also during sex, oxytocin is released and it bonds you to your spouse. And so that is so important too. So you want to be able to like pursue all of these ways of bonding and creating oneness. So that is the third step, my friends. Third step. Now, the fourth one is to continue to do your work. So let's just say you were the person who offended. You have work to do. You have to be transparent. You need to be remorseful. You need to be empathic. You have to be there to support your spouse through their forgiveness journey, through their healing journey. You got to be there. So you got to do your work, and you got to do your work on yourself to partner with God. So how can I, change? How can I become this better version of myself in partnership with the Lord? And also to do the work. Like, it's also like, here's the thing, when something has happened to you, it's still your responsibility to do the work and partner with God to heal. It's not something that happens by happenstance. You have to pursue it. And sometimes you have to aggressively pursue it with God. And if you want some tips and strategies and want to dissect that more, feel free to go to part 1 of this little forgiveness, trust building podcast little series. And you can get a lot of tips there. And then here's the thing. Forgiveness is not a one-time act. I always say that forgiveness preserves the best version of you, because it truly does. Forgiveness preserves the best version of you. And with that being said, forgiveness is not just this one-time act. Forgiveness is a lifestyle. Because forgiveness should be extended to your spouse or your partner or child or whomever you're in a relationship with. But then it also, sometimes you have to extend it to yourself. Forgive yourself of things that you may have said, that you may have done, that may have hurt your spouse. And so it literally is a lifestyle, not a one-time event when monumentous things happen from here and there. It's the small slights, not letting them small slights build up, right? Because, unforgiveness looks the same, whether it's a big offense or a small offense. It looks like a restricted, hurt, limping version of you. And we want you to be able to run in full stride when it comes to rebuilding trust in your relationship. And then here is the 5th step. You have to recommit to your vows. Renew your vows with respect. Literally say them all over again, right? Remind yourself of those promises that you made for richer or for poorer, especially if there was a financial situation, forsaking all others if there was a sexual infidelity or something of that nature. Remind yourself of what you said you would live out from the beginning and recommit yourself to that thing, family. Recommit yourself to that. All righty. Now, I promised you something, and I try to deliver. And I promised you that we would talk about the T's for rebuilding trust. So I have 4 T's for rebuilding trust. And the very first thing is, if you have offended in your relationship, you have to, first of all, be trustworthy now. And so you must be trustworthy in all of your actions. If there is any hint, if it even looks, you want to shun the very appearance of evil in any kind of way. So, if it was something financial, you want to be like, hey, I made this purchase today. I know we agreed that there would be a certain dollar amount. Just want to let you know that I was thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts? Also, too, a second T is you got to be an open book now. If there was a separate account that you were running up, I don't know what it could be, especially if there was some type of infidelity or something sexual in nature. You have to be an open book, phones, passwords. Like, you have to be fully transparent, right? Clear. You got to be clear. Like those, what is it? I think when you go to the stadium now, they want you to have like clear bags. Some places you go, they want you to have clear bags. They see everything in there that's moving around. Make sure you don't have anything that can hurt anyone else. And that's the truth. That's what happens. You have to be like a clear bag so that your partner can see through that bag to ensure that there's nothing in there that would hurt them, you, or the relationship. Something important. Another T for rebuilding trust is actually togetherness. The whatever happened, it broke the bond in a certain way. So you want to work fervently to rebuild trust in your sense of oneness together. And I think another part of that is honestly just with the trustworthiness kind of goes back. Let me go back to trustworthiness for example. Your trustworthiness can be proven in areas that were outside of the area that you offended. Meaning that if you say that you're going to do something, whether it be big or small, and you actually follow through with that thing, that is actually you rebuilding trust. It may not be in the area that you offended, but even if you're untrustworthy in areas that you didn't offend in, you may say that has nothing to do with the area that I offended in. Yes, it does. Because trust is global. It's a global thing, right? Think about it. If someone broke your trust in one area, now you don't trust them with nothing. It's kind of like, it's like, let's just say you're in business with somebody and they did something deceptive or bad, to someone. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't do business with you at all because I don't know what you could do. So that's something to consider. So you can rebuild trust by being trustworthy, even in areas that may not be necessarily directly related to the area in which offense happened. And lastly, really, it does take time. But if you heard part one, time in and of itself does not heal all wounds. You have to use that time in alignment with your trust building goals, right? So be patient with yourself, give yourself time, but do the work. During that time, do the work and let that drop accumulate and let another drop accumulate and let another step accumulate and let another step accumulate. And before long, if you just stick with the process, you'll look up and you'll be in your spouse's arms again. You'll be in a tender embrace because you've done the work and you both made forward steps back to one another. So with that, we talked a little bit about, rebuilding trust and what the, person needs to do if they've offended. What about the person who's been wounded? What about the person whose trust has been broken? What do they need? They need true repentance and remorse. They need utmost empathy, utmost compassion. They need time for their own grieving and healing process as well. And they need that hope for the future. So when the other person shows up in a trustworthy manner, the other person shows up in a transparent manner, they show up in this way that's promoting togetherness. What that does is it gives both of them hope, but especially the person who's been offended. Now I got a little bit of substance to my hope. Now it's not just a pipe dream. I got a little evidence that we're making some steps forward. And then lastly, put forth that effort, making effective repairs. I'm probably going to have to do another podcast episode, maybe on apology languages and repairing effectively, because the research is very clear. We all need repairs, but some of us are not repairing effectively, and our repair attempts are actually creating sometimes a little bit more pain. And that's not what we want. It's not our intention, right? It's not our intention, but sometimes that's the result. And so we really want to be mindful that we're using the actual strategies that truly help us heal, family, right? And so this is so important. And this is life. If we're in the lifestyle of forgiveness, we have to be in the lifestyle of reconciliation and restoring. Remember in the first podcast episode, I was talking about how, that passage of scripture where it talks about how, we've been reconciled back to Christ and now we've been given over to the ministry of reconciliation. And when you're married, that is a part of your ministry now. And that is your ministry with your spouse. In the ministry of reconciliation. And to reconcile means to win back to friendliness. To win back to a harmonious state. And sometimes when there's been a huge breach, it's hard to believe that there could be a possibility of winning your spouse back, or you even being in a position now where you're in a harmonious state. It's more friendly. Now it's more amicable, but hope is your first step. And doing those steps to rebuild trust, it will help you get closer And the closer you get, see, sometimes when you're far away from something, it's almost like it doesn't really feel real. But when you can get close up to that thing because you've done the work and you've made the steps, it's undeniable, especially when you can literally reach out and see it and almost touch it. So that's what happens when we make those efforts to move forward and do the work. It gets us closer up to the hope. It gives us a real close-up view to what's possible and no longer seems far-fetched and no longer seems impossible. What's impossible with man is not impossible with God, family. And with his power, I always say, if God can do miraculous healings in people's bodies, he can also do a miraculous healing in a marriage or a relationship. So that's where we'll end at today. Practical steps, because I guess I always have a little homework for you, little practical steps. Even if there hasn't been trust that's been broken or anything of that nature, we can always do things to even take our trust to a higher level. Whether it could be like, how can you elevate your vision and your expectation of your relationship? How can you promote more oneness? How can you even if there wasn't something, how can you be more transparent with your spouse? Even if it's the fact that you're actually holding and away from them and not disclosing how you really feel about life, or you're kind of, not sharing your emotions. How can you even be more transparent? How can you be more trustworthy? The reality is that we can all grow in this, regardless if there's been a big or a small infraction. We can always put some drops in the bucket, and drops in the bucket always help. You don't want to poke holes in that bucket, family. So what's one thing that you're going to do to drop some drops in that trust bucket? How can you be more trustworthy? How can you be more transparent? How can you give your spouse or yourself more time and grace to grow? All righty, family. So now we are at that part of the podcast where I actually take a question from our little fishbowl, see what we're working with today. And I am so excited. Let's see. Make sure I only got one this time. Oh, this is good. So this one, and I think this one is actually oftentimes I don't know what we're going to get, and I don't know if it's going to be related to the content, but I actually think that this is kind of indirectly related to the content that we've shared today. And it asks, what do you do if your partner's sexual desires aren't things that you're interested in? Alrighty, so there are several fronts on this. Now, if you find something demeaning, you definitely want to have a conversation about that. But, when we're thinking about marriage and we're thinking about sex, even the word says, don't defraud one another. Don't, withhold, sex from one another. Right. And so my question is, I think it's going to be very important that it's something that you both talk about, but then also remember, unless it's something that you find extremely degrading, but remember that sex is a gift that you're giving. So there's also this sense of serving as well. And so you may want to have a few questions to ask yourself. Is this a way that it may be outside of my realm, but I'm open to serving my spouse in this nature? And if that's the case, that's just something that's a question that you have to ask yourself. And also your spouse, and ask them, what does this mean to you? Because sometimes when we say, I won't do this, I won't do that, that may mean in their eyes, in some people's eyes, that may mean, do you love me? Do you not love me? I don't know. Now, if it's one thing that you want to do is use the Bible as your standard, ultimate standard. Now, if there is something where it's totally against the word of God and it's something risque, like inviting somebody else in, ultimately that's not God. That's not biblical. And that's just honestly asking for trouble. But if it's something that you feel like, yeah, that may not be something that I guess thought that I would do, but if it's something that if it's like a stretch, but it's not like a totally non-negotiable, then, I think it's going to be something for you guys to really talk about. And then maybe, see if you can talk to a counselor about it as well. What does this act mean to the person who's requesting it? But then also, what does this act mean to you that this is being requested by? I mean, you are getting the request. What does this mean to you? Did you grow up thinking that this act was dirty? Did you grow up? And I think sometimes in our spaces, we're told that certain things are dirty, or sex in and of itself is, and people are not enjoying something that God created for us to enjoy, for us to bond. It's like birth. I mean, well, no, it's not like birth. I hope it's not like birth. Oh gosh. Well, I actually enjoy birth. But anyway, that's just me. But I'm the one person who love being pregnant and just love, my kids' birthdays. I just think about it fondly. I didn't have any problem birthing babies. Okay. I know. But it's like, I guess it's kind of like birth in the way that our bodies were built to do it. It's a beautiful thing that God created. And, and so you have to just ask, first of all, does it go against a principle or standard in the Word of God? So that's definitely something that is, if it is, we already know who the deciding factor is. It's essentially the Word of God. But if not, then, how can you guys meet each other? How can you meet each other in the middle, of the road or, talk about, well, what does this mean? And be encouraged. It doesn't have to be oh, it's going to be conflict. It can actually bring more understanding and maybe potentially even more intimacy, whether it's emotional intimacy or physical intimacy. So that's your question. Be encouraged, family. Well, I guess that's all for now. Until I see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I love you. And I mean it, giving you a little virtual hug right here from the couch. And you guys take good care. Until next time.